allowed to say that because it's still January, so we have a little bit more time and we can still say that. Bear with me for a second, and I'm just gonna share my screen.
Or do you want me to do that, Susan?
If
No,
you
okay.
have it, yeah.
I have it, but if you're gonna do it, we could fight over who's gonna do it, and you're gonna win.
All right, yeah, no, I've got
Okay.
it right here.
Okay, good for you.
Okay, can everyone see that?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And for some reason, oh, there we go. Okay, so I can't see the screen that you're looking at, but I've got it on my other monitor, fortunately. And now I can still see all of your, or most of your faces anyway. So this, believe it or not, is session 6. As Patricia said, it is the final and last session, and we're back. Your trusty faculty members are back. This is really a session to loop back through a lot of what we've talked about, but sort of some of the things we talked about early on may not have meant as much when we first said it as it might now, 6 sessions in. So we really want to just sort of loop back a little bit and go through some of it to refresh your memory, go in at a little bit of a deeper level on a few topics, and then we'll end up with just some trending topics that you should think about over the next year. But as always, keep us on our toes. Take yourself off mute, raise your hand, do whatever you need to do to get attention. But if you have something that you want to ask or comment on as we go along, please don't hesitate. So just as a reminder, it's hard to believe, but here we are. We started last April. We did sort of an overview of the boardroom. We went and talked about ESG and stakeholders. We talked about board committees. We talked about the roadmap to the boardroom, board diplomacy, and here we are at session 6. So the agenda I've talked about. So let's review this a little bit. And again, please comment, ask questions as we go along if you have any. As we first, I think this was the very first slide that we talked about is why join a board? I was in a conversation with someone the other day, and we were preparing for a session to a different group for aspiring board members. And this is someone who sat on a board for a long time. And his comment was, when I first joined my first board, I had no idea what I was doing. If someone asked me why I wanted to join a board, I would have made something up. But the reality was that it was prestigious. And that was as far as I thought. But you guys know so much more than that. It's really a way to make an impact, to kind of work at a strategic level that you don't necessarily get to do on a day-to-day basis in your day job, and to look further out in terms of time frame than you can in your day job. Elevating your experience, no matter what your day job is, getting onto a board gives you that sort of, as one board member likes to describe it, you're in the balcony. And you're looking down, and you're either cheering or throwing tomatoes, but you have that sort of 50,000-foot look at it, and building networks. The board world is in many ways a club. Once you serve on boards, you get to know other board members, and it really introduces you to a totally different network than you might be. And particularly if you're someone who spent a lot of your career, sort of heads down, doing brilliant things, but not really focusing on networking. It is a great way to just expand that group of people that you can learn from and engage with. On the flip side, there are risks. You have to be really careful that you're in a spot where if all of a sudden the board goes from 4 meetings a year to weekly or daily meetings because the company's in a crisis or it's being sold or there's some other thing going on, you have to be in a position where you can manage through that. And so that's, sort of one of the first things we say is that really think about, is this the right time for you to be on a board? And what's your backup plan if it winds up being much more time consuming than you expect? Reputation is another risk to be aware of. And that's because once you're particularly with your first board, what happens with that company is going to be forever tied to the way people think about you. And so then that gets to the question of, you want to be very careful when you pick your boards and do as much due diligence as you possibly can. And then legal issues. I say this as a former lawyer. You will get sued. I guarantee it. And if you don't get sued at some point in your board career, it's because you haven't been on enough boards yet. But having said that, there are very, very few board members that actually are required to hand over, write a check in a lawsuit. There should be insurance, there should be protections that you can get. But going through the process and being put on the spot under oath to justify, what you did as a board member is something every board member has to do. So again, not a reason not to do it, but something to be aware of. So then we talked about what boards do. And Stephen, can I hand this one over to you?
Yeah, and hello everyone, and glad to be at our 6th and final section. Actually, we have the graduation, but this is our final doctrinal session. And Susan, by the way, I just want to tell you, I am monitoring the chat when it comes through, so I'll take first in making sure we have that. I am not as rich as you in having all these monitors. I got one monitor in front of me, so that's why I'm glad you're doing that, but I can monitor the chat. Look, I'm aspiring in 2024 to be like you, Susan. I will get there, and I'll let everyone know when that happens. This is my this puzzle we put up of the 6 things which boards do. And by the way, I still believe in it. I use it every day, and I try to in answering questions around boards. So not for board fit, but for and consulting, think about whatever question that someone has to fit it into one of these things, and it helps me ground. This is the domain of the board, because there are many things that will come up that are not necessarily the domain of the board. And that's also what we sort of went through in this process. Leadership, talent, strategy, capital allocation, risk, human capital management, and compliance, or being in charge of making sure there are programs to give you board members the information that you need to know. And so I literally yesterday go through this puzzle, and when someone's talking to me, and I figure out where it is, and then if I can't really fit it into one of these, I try to, or I say, look, I'm not sure this is for the board in the board's domain, and I really try to keep to the discipline of dealing with what's in the board's domain, including with some of the things which we all know that we saw in 2023 and will be prominent in 2024, that are newer issues. I still try to, like AI, I fit it in. Where does it go? And it may go into several different boxes. The politicization of capitalism, and there are 69 different elections across the world that have democracy on the ballot, to be frank, including here in the United States. I fit it in where it goes, because if I can't fit it in, then I don't think it's the domain of the board. So let me pause there and thank you for putting up those notes on when we have graduation, Patricia. Susan, back to you.
Okay. So, oh, no, Stephen, we're going to stick with you. This is your slide.
Sure.
Go
Well,
ahead.
and thank you for doing this. Thank you for this slide in particular, because I think it's representation of it represents sort of where we think the modern board is that part of your job is managing all those issues of 6 framework issues that we had up in the last slide, but understanding you have to do that while you're managing stakeholders in this term called ESG. So let me just take a pause and give my little lecture, which I think I may have given it before, or maybe will be new here, which is that we all understand that the term ESG has it's a Rorschach test. It's you put it up and it means different things to different people. Some people think it's the God evil in the world. Some people know it's not God evil, but they play that role because there's a politics to it. Others are deeply sincere, and they think it means more than what I think it means. And so, I'll give you the 3 Ps, like I always like to say about ESG, which is, it's a product. You can have an ESG product, such as the S&P 500 ESG fund or some kind of fund that has an ESG screen. It's also, the other P is for process. And it describes a process that you might go through on a variety of different products or different services that have an environmental, social, and governance tinge. And the other P is for purpose. Just a general sense that when someone says ESG, they're talking about how they would go about running a business. And there's so many things in there where we push you, and hopefully we've done it through the 5 sessions thus far, is that if you're talking about an environmental issue, if you're talking about a socially oriented issue, then you should be very clear of what you're talking about. If you're talking about climate change, then that's great. You're talking about climate change. If you're talking about human capital management and hiring people and recruitment, or having diverse viewpoints, then you're talking about that. And that's the language. I like to use that secondary language instead of lumping everything into ESG, because ESG can mean different things to different people. And this slide here sort of points out how many different stakeholders, people who are affected by the corporation, that we all have to manage. And part of being a board member is that you have to prioritize. We're often asked, Susan and I, in boardrooms, okay, so how do we manage stakeholders? And I always sort of smile, being that, well, that's the secret sauce of being a board member. And that's why you get paid what you do, which you got to think. And by the way, you do this all the time. I have to remind board members, you do it all the time. When you decide to take retained earnings and give a dividend, you're making a choice amongst stakeholders, because you're going to give a dividend versus maybe raising pay for your employees. Or maybe you do both. You're that lucky. But usually deciding between one or the other. So boards do it all the time. They may not know that they're doing it. And when you bring them this concept of managing stakeholders, they're like, so how do we do it? Tell me how to prioritize. And I always like just putting it back to them. That's your job. My job is to make sure that you know who all the stakeholders are. Your job, the secret sauce, is figure out how you're going to prioritize them in different ways. So with that, Susan, I'll pass it back to you.
Okay. So one of the other things that we talked about is board committees. And before I get to it, Miguel, I just want to acknowledge your question and let you know we will come back to it. The question you raised about how having an activist investor on the board changes the board dynamic. It's a great question, and if we don't get back to it when we talk about board diplomacy, ping us again, because it's a really important question. So just on the topic of board committees, there's a reason why we think it's important to talk about board committees before you're even on a board. And that is because as board members look for board candidates, they're not only thinking about who do we want in the boardroom, they're thinking about what gaps do we have to fill on our committees and what's our committee succession planning. So if you don't understand the committees, it's hard to get that full picture of what board members are looking for when they recruit for the board. So just, to be aware, I think everyone knows, every board has a chair. Sometimes the chair is also the CEO, sometimes not. When the chair is the CEO, it's very, very common, particularly in public companies, to have someone who has the title of lead director. And essentially, they are serve as a counterweight to the chair and CEO, where they're independent, they bring the voice of the boardroom in, and they can be quite influential in the boardroom. But they are first, whether the lead director or the chair, they are first among equals, because the board is a collaborative body. And so no one is really in charge. No one can make decisions without the input from the entire board. So a lot of the work gets done at the committees. For public companies, there are 3 required committees, and most private companies have these 3 committees as well. Sometimes they'll combine them, but they usually have them. Audit committee is obvious. It's all about overseeing the financial reporting. Sometimes the audit committee has a broader mandate depending on the company. And this is important to know, because sometimes cybersecurity fits within the mandate of the audit committee. Sometimes it can be somewhere else. So if you have a cybersecurity background, you should be sure you know which committee does that fit into, because you want to know whether you're being recruited for the audit committee or somewhere else, or risk committee or a technology committee. So that's the audit committee. Compensation committee has changed over the years. It used to be about just what the CEO and sort of the top C-suite group get paid. It's so much more than that now. At the other end of the spectrum, and again, companies are going to vary along the spectrum, but at the other end of the spectrum, it's really the people committee. So anything that has to do with human beings in the company, whether it's sort of the policies around compensation, corporate culture, DEI, labor compensation strategies, all these kinds of things. Martin, thank you for adding in say on pay. In a public company, the shareholders get to vote about what they think about the declared executive compensation. It's an advisory vote. It's not binding, but you do not want to be in a position where the investors have voted against the compensation that the board has approved, and then they haven't changed it the next year. Because what a lot of investors will say is, if it hasn't changed, that means this is a board that's not listening to its shareholders. And going back to what Stephen said, talking about stakeholders, shareholders as stakeholders need to be listened to. And so if they think the board members are not listening, they will vote against the board members. And we've seen that done frequently. So it's really important to understand that whole dynamic. The Nominating and Governance Committee is also an interesting committee, because again, it used to be really about who is going to be next on the board, who are we going to replace as people retire, how do we look at things like board evaluations. And it's still that, but it is also quite common for the Nominating and Governance Committee to take on a broader mandate, looking at all of the stakeholder issues. So sometimes, frequently, in fact, in public companies, you'll see ESG within the remit of the Nominating and Governance Committee. So again, really important to understand what the committee's remit is, because they will vary among companies. And then some other potential committees. Some companies have finance committees. Most don't, but you will find some that do. Risk committees are mandated for financial services, and that was an outgrowth out of the financial crisis. A few companies outside of financial services industry have risk committees, but I think it's like 10, 15%, something like that. Most of them don't. A technology committee, usually a company is larger if it has a technology committee. You tend not to find it in smaller companies. One, because they don't have a large enough size to have a second, extra committee, and two, because they don't have enough people to put on that committee. They may only have one director who really understands technology, but you may find a technology committee. And the important question there, if there is a technology committee, is this only about risk, or is it also about strategy and opportunity? Because ideally it should be that, sort of broad look at how the company is interacting with technology. ESG, I mentioned. An executive committee. This is something to look at, particularly in the nonprofit world. There are nonprofit boards, many of them, that will have boards of 50 or more members. You're not getting a lot done with a board that size. And so frequently the executive committee on these boards is the group that really makes decisions. Depending on the board, that can work well, or it can be highly dysfunctional. So if you're looking at a nonprofit board that has a lot of board members and an executive committee, you want to really understand what the role of the executive committee is and what that means for you as a board member if you're not on the executive committee. Are you still getting the right information that you need to carry out your duties? And then there's some other committees, strategy, compliance, or public policy, but those are less common. Stephen, roadmap to the boardroom.
Yes, ma'am. And look, this is the slide for me that tells you everything, which is it is about who you know, and it is about what you know. And for many people, the who you know is a lot bigger circle than what you know. And that's okay, by the way. And for others, the what you know circle can be very big and the who you know very small. That's okay too, but that person's at a disadvantage because it's very much the intersection of the two. But what you know can help enlarge who you know. It was told to me when I was in law school, and I will tell it to you, that Supreme Court judges are only lawyers who knew a senator. There are plenty of smart people out there, smart lawyers who could be Supreme Court judges, but are not. The same thing for board members. There are plenty of very capable executives who could be board members, but they are not. And I would submit that they didn't know the right people, or they didn't get to know the right people, because there are gatekeepers out there, whether they're headhunters, but really, for the most part, people like themselves who are sitting on boards who will do the referral and do the work. So good 60, almost 70% of people who sit on boards have been referred to that board by the sitting board member, by someone in the boardroom. And we can sort of think about why that is. So boards are consensus-driven institutions. You get to the board and you don't leave unless you hit an age limit or a term limit, or you don't want to be there anymore, or something really bad happens, but that's pretty rare, that last category. So given that, people want to sit on boards with people who they trust. They happen to trust themselves a lot. Big egos involved. So they tend to replicate themselves. They tend to replicate who is in their midst. And when they bring on a new board member, the big question is who knows that person? Even if they hire a recruitment firm who gives them, after much discussion of what they want and analysis, and they come in, it's called giving a slate. They provide a slate of people to the board or to the nomination committee. And that nomination committee will sit around a room and say, okay, we got these 10 names. All right, let's run down the names. Who knows Susan? And they're looking around the room at the other board members. No one knows Susan. They won't throw her out, but they'll move her to the side. No, who knows John? Who knows Steve? Oh, you know Steve? Tell me about Steve. Because they want someone who is in the club already to verify that they know this person and that they've worked with this person some way or somehow. So who you know does matter. And a lot of what we're doing at this stage, or what the folks on the call are doing, or should be doing on the stage, is figuring out who you know and also figuring out what you know. Because we've talked a lot, and I think we'll rephrase it, reiterate it, that is, in the next 60 minutes, of using what you know and how you get exposure. And that exposure will help broaden who you know, or who knows you, to put it a different way. Who knows you. So I love this one slide. It shows the Venn diagram, although and it shows it as equal, who you know, what you know, who and what. But usually there's a imbalance, that who you know may be bigger than what you know, and that what you, by the way, you know that in your day jobs, that's the case. There's a whole bunch of folks who don't know a lot, that you may be reporting to, and we'll keep that to ourselves. But so both are important. They may be of different sizes, but we're looking to make that connection.
Thanks. So this is, we've done this slide before, and just as a reminder, this is something that no board member will ever tell you. No recruiter will ever tell you. But if you talk to a board member over a few drinks and you say, when you interview people, this is really sort of what goes through your mind, they'll say, yeah, absolutely. So it's really important to think about this is, so it's my, nice little acronym, serving. But the first is strategic and future focused. And the odd thing is that it's a little bit of a balancing act, because the more you are an expert in something that the rest of the board doesn't understand, on the one hand, the more they think you would add value. On the other hand, the more they think you are potentially a narrow technician who is only going to stick to, topic X. I mean, I even just this morning, I was on a call with a former CEO who's served on boards for decades, and he was talking about cybersecurity experts and saying, you really have to be careful about getting a cybersecurity expert on the board, because there's a tendency for them to only add to the conversation when it has anything to do with cybersecurity. And that's not what we want in a board seat. So I think he's wrong. I think if you're on a board as a cybersecurity expert, you can certainly and should certainly add to the conversation in every way, shape, and form. But I think what you need to understand is that because you all come from the tech world, there's going to be kind of a natural question mark in the minds of people to say, is this someone who's really going to be a well-rounded board member, or is this someone who only gets the tech part? So you have to, sort of overcompensate and over-communicate to get over that hurdle. Not everyone's going to think that way, but there are some board members that will. So you can't over-communicate enough that you understand strategy, you're future focused, you've got a broad curiosity about business. And then the next one of this is you're experienced financially. It's not just bits and bytes, it's P&L also. If you've run a P&L, terrific. If you haven't, then again, it's a matter of over communicating that you know how to do this. And one way to, sort of round that out too, is if you're on a nonprofit board, put yourself or, see if you can get yourself on the finance committee or the audit committee. Because again, it will add to that rounded picture of who you are. The next is the relevant superpower. And this, Stephen and I talked to a lot of people who aspire to the boardroom. And a lot of times we have to spend, significant discussion on this topic. This is easy. Everyone in this room has a relevant superpower because of the fact that you come from the tech world. And so you've got that. Don't worry about that. But the rest of it is where, again, over communication may be needed. The valued and trusted, this gets to, what Stephen was saying, which is so right, that everyone's going to say, do you know this person? Have you seen them operate in a crisis? Have you seen them operate where there's a tough ethical issue or difficult conversations? How do they behave? Because board members want to know, because they will potentially be in that situation with you. And so it's really, really important. So you can't put on your resume, I'm valued and trusted. But what you can do is, if you've got a network and you can get someone else to be a champion for you, to give that perspective in a subtle way, that's really, really important. The illuminating piece of it is too, and illuminating links a little bit into this strategic and future focus, because as we'll talk about a little later on too, being a board member is all about the art of the question. And it's not just a question of, what did you mean in footnote 49? And do these numbers add up? It's the kind of question where everyone stops and says, wow, I never thought about that. Thank God someone raised that issue before we went down a path that would have been a mistake. Or thank God someone raised that suggestion that opened up a whole new area of opportunity for us. That's the art of the question. And that's what I mean by illuminating. And again, it's a very subtle thing, because you can't put it on a resume. It's hard to weave into a conversation. But if you are in a board interview and you do have an example of a time where you asked a question that turned the conversation around, be sure to use that example and try to find a way to weave it into the discussion. Networked is another thing, we talked about, Stephen talked about, it's who you know, which is so important. And it's who you know to kind of get you the introductions that'll get you into a board seat. It's also board members thinking, is this a person who is going to be able to introduce us to people that are going to be helpful to us? So, particularly with venture companies, they want to be introduced to sources of capital, but any company is always looking. So, it's like, the more you're considered part of, the club or an in-group with a long, strong network, the more you're going to be considered valuable. And then governance literate. If you've never served on a board before, they get that. But if you've never served on a board before, you've never served on a nonprofit board, and you've never presented to your own board, that's a harder sell. So the more you can weave a story, and what you're doing right now is very much part of that story. You want to highlight the fact that you have spent what is it, 12 hours, talking, listening to, engaging on conversations about what boards do. And if you can get involved in either presenting to your company as board or being involved in some way in the back with helping prepare the presentations, that helps too, to just be able to say, I understand the way boards think about things. Nonprofit boards will help with that also. So again, the more you become someone that surrounds yourself with things that board members will find comfortable. Stephen, do you want to take the next slide?
Sure. Um, now, so how do we get where we want to get to? And building your toolkit, which is actually, a good phrase for building a toolkit. I like to take out a clean sheet of paper, or actually maybe have my own notebook or journal where I keep this information. And I believe very firmly it was part of someone else did a board readiness program that I was sort of asked to be part of. And she said, "Oh, well, there'll be no homework. You'll just sit there and listen." And I'm just shaking my head, saying, "No, there's homework. There's work to be done, because you want to think about and really put down all your executive experiences, your board exposure, and different things." Um, that make who you are. And this, of course, is different from the resume that you use to get a job. We're talking about something differently, because that's going to be the basis for what you come up with in building your board bio. Your board bio, which is one page, it typically has your picture on it, smiling. And it's a narrative form about who you are and your value proposition, while also telling the story uh, about why you want to be on the board, why you're so valuable, and maybe that you have a dog and 3 kids and you coach softball, for the last sentence. But more importantly is to think about, there are some positions that you have where it will speak volumes. And I'm president of XYZ, the United States division, or some division. You don't have, for some folks, you don't have to say more than that. In terms of your work history, I mean, you'll walk through your accomplishments. For others, it's just not so clear about what you do for a living, and it's not so clear about exactly what what level you are at the firm, or what level of things that you've done in terms of a P&L, in terms of managing people, and you'll have to explain that. Part of that, and I sort of call that part of assessing where you are. Look, I have a very good friend who's a CFO of an extraordinarily major company in the Fortune 50. He doesn't have to explain what he does for a living, right? That's one sentence. And others who are equally as talented at the same age, who will have to go in depth about the skill set he has gained and the things that he's done from a P&L standpoint, from understanding different aspects of managing people. So that's part of understanding who you are at this time. I sort of equate this, Susan, to something which everyone may be able to relate to, which is that time, go way back, that time in high school when you're thinking about colleges. And you might have a college counselor or a guidance counselor, which, by the way, and the evidence points this out, so I'm not being pejorative and saying something I don't know. The evidence points it out. Most of them have no idea what they're talking about. But nevertheless, you love them because they're your counselors. But you're going through this period of, where do I fit? And the people are telling me I should do all these different things. I should go here and there. Where do I really fit, and where do I have a chance of getting in? And of course, chance of getting in. You're picking your dream. You're picking where it might be a little bit of a stretch, and you're picking where you think you're a shoe in, and that's a nice balanced portfolio. Similar here. What I'd like to do is look through public companies. don't forget private companies, but public companies will be public. You can go online and use Google or Bing and like find this information. Look at the bios of those sitting at, let's say, the Disney board. And Disney has a big election coming up. They have an activist there, and then they have a sub-activist, which is sort of crazy. Um, and look at the board, look at who's on the board and what they do, and try to look at those profiles. And what I try to do is match myself up with those profiles. Oh, he's doing that. I do the same thing. That could be me. Or here's my gap. This is what I need to get this under my belt because I want to have the profile that that guy has, and he's sitting on the board. So I might have to go and whether it's lateral up outside the company, do something to get that experience to sort of beef up my profile. But that's what you want to do, and plotting out where do you want to go. There's something else which I call it the exposure plan, exposure knowledge plan, which is literally listing out what am I going to do each month or each quarter, leave it to each quarter, to expand my knowledge, or do a course like this, or enroll in a high-tech thing like this, or go to some program where I learn a little bit more, or read this or that. And then exposure. How do I get known? Expand who I know, that circle. I'm going to make sure I go to this program. Right. And it's a pain. Right? It's cold. I'm going to go outside. I'm going to get on an airplane. I'm going to spend my own money. But I'm going to do it because I'm going to meet X. Or I hope to meet X, or I'll be in the room to meet the different gatekeepers. So this point about building your toolkit, literally for me, is taking out a piece of paper or a journal and writing it all down and sort of figuring out this is what I'm going to do. We also put in there employer approval. I just mentioned this one thing, which is that there will, at some point, when you're in pursuit of a board position, you're going to have to get approval. And approval is many different facets. Most companies have some kind of policy. Some, as Susan and I were talking to a very big company, they really don't have a policy. They have an email that you send it to, and then you'll get an email back. These are very senior people. They could not tell me who's sending the email back. They're like, yeah, I know. It's at conflicts.com. I said, no, there has to be a person. They're like, we have no idea. But they never get any pushback. And we know that they really have an open policy. You have some companies that have a policy, and it's usually run by the CEO, that says no one can serve on the board. But I've had a number of people that I've run into about that. And part of my spiel is that you need to consider if you're going to still work there. Because I actually think that's, and there's one big company, I'll leave them nameless, that has that policy, which I think is deeply detrimental. I have a feeling that that might change in a year or so, because I know who's second in command there, who just got there. And if he doesn't do it, I'm going to tell him he needs to do it. But sort of making sure that you go through the approval process, because they're trying to check that there's no conflicts, right? And that's deeply important because you can't be in conflict with the company that you do for your day job. So let me pause there. And Susan, see if you want to pick up on this, or I don't think we have any new questions in the chat here.
Yeah, now the only thing I would add to is when you think about your visibility, think about it in a different way than you do think about it for your day job. Mm-hmm. So, for example, you may be an expert in X, and you get tapped a lot to speak about X to people who are implementing X within their companies. That's wonderful. Think about writing something, you can do one of those, sort of write an article on LinkedIn and post it to your network about how X impacts company strategy, how X impacts company risk, what the trends are in X. So you want to be visible outside of the world of practitioners and inside the world of people that are just really looking at the 10,000-foot level. So it's a different way of positioning yourself. And it's really hard to do. There are some companies that are communications companies that, work with executives to sort of make that shift. But it's really important to think about that, and then think about who your audiences are. If you're interested in private equity boards, find some private equity conferences and volunteer to speak. Those are the kinds of things where it's outside of what you do day to day, but it will get you in front of people that can help further you on your board journey in a different kind of a way. So it just takes a little bit of extra thought and intentionality to get yourself into those spaces. And there's a question, Martin asked, would we be available to provide feedback on our board bio resume? The answer is yes, sort of. Frankly, it's a matter of bandwidth, and also there are organizations that specialize deeply in writing these resumes, board resumes, and we can provide them. So yes, happy to take a look, but can't promise that it would be the sort of in-depth review that you might get, with a company that specializes in them. I don't know, Stephen, if you.
I think that's perfectly said. We'll take a look, and it also just depends on deal flow. I may have time to really take a deep look, or I may have time. And this is what I will be. Listen, I also teach law school. Or I have a wonderful student. Like, okay, professor, I'm ready to meet you. I'm good February. I'm like, well, wait a minute. I know you're good, but it depends on what I'm doing. But I'll get back to you and say, hey, here's what I think, or I have time to do it, or I'm not going to have time for 45 days to take a look at this.
And we'll circulate the names and contact information for
Yeah.
some of these companies that do that. So the next is board diplomacy, and I'll start with this, and then Stephen, we'll go on beyond to you. But again, as we've alluded to, boardrooms are really different. There is no one in charge, and in fact, the board chair, a good board chair, never makes a decision and never influences a decision. A good board chair is more like the orchestrator, the conductor of an orchestra that, sort of brings out the best and brings out the harmony. It is a consensus-driven organization, which is very different than what we're all doing in our day job. We all manage people and have a manager to report to. It's very different in a boardroom. Hierarchy is only in setting the agenda. The chair, along with the CEO, sets the agenda for the board meeting, and the chair of the committees set the agenda for the committees. But otherwise, it is, very much peer groups. And you have to understand and respect, sort of what goes on and what the protocols are in a boardroom. I mean, what you don't want to do is be someone who asks the really challenging, difficult question to the most junior person in the boardroom, the most junior member of management in the boardroom, without having, given the CEO a heads up that this is something you're interested in. Death knell for your relationship with the CEO. You also don't want to be the one who is going to ask that deep, challenging, probing question just as everyone is packing up to leave to get their flights back. So having that emotional intelligence and just awareness of how things are perceived and taken is really, really important. As this says, knowing what you stand for personally and what you're not willing to stand for. So there will be times where you will disagree with a decision. Generally, board members will say, okay, I've argued against it, but I am now part of this peer group. I support this decision, even though it's not what I would do. There are going to be some things where you just can't support it, and you need to know that and make sure others know that in advance. And be ready to resign from a board if things get really, really awful, which can happen. And be aware that if it's a public company board, your resignation is public and you may be getting media calls. So it's all very, very rare occasions. It's only when things are very dysfunctional, but it has happened and it can happen. Which is why you should never, ever rely on a board spot as your sole source of income, because you do have to be ready potentially to walk away from it. And then doing your homework, owning your expertise. You will get a lot of reading before you go into the boardroom. And the less functional board meetings are easier because management sits and presents about what you should have already read. The more engaging, higher level boards expect that every board member going into that meeting has already read what may be 500 or more pages, has made notes, and has questions ready going into the board meeting. And so you really have to be, especially as a new board member, to prove, sort of that you're on top of it, really ready, really have done your homework, and own your expertise. If it's a tech question and you're the only one in the room that realizes that management is trying to snow the board with a lot of bullshit, call them on it. Again, going back to the respect and the protocols, you have to think about how to call them on it and the right way to do that. But you do, you're there for a reason, and it's not to go along and get along. It is because of the fact that your opinion is valuable. So, know how to use it and when to use it and when to pick your battles. Stephen.
Well, this is part of being a good board member, which is really how to ask questions and asking the right questions. And they ask the right questions, the right time, to the right people, and wait for the right answer. The annals of corporate history and of scandal and of wrongdoing and of financial crisis of booms and busts are built on boards who did three out of the four. They may have asked the right question, uh, ultimately, eventually to the right people, but they didn't wait for the right answer. And we know that because things have gone wrong, and we have a post-mortem, whether it's a, a, a court proceeding or a real law firm investigation memo that's been made public as part of the settlement. Not waiting for the right answer, and that's really important. So part of doing your homework and reading all the papers, and you get every single paper you get, and every board member gets a board book that is much longer than should be and complains about it. Every single board member from Japan to LA to large company to small company, you get board books that are just too thick, and nothing's going to happen. It's not going to get thinner. It's just the way it is. There's a way to make it thinner, but don't hold your breath on that. And it is assumed that every single thing, every single page in that book that you read. So it's important, and I like to think about it as a board member. All right, so what questions will I ask? And I'm not going to ask a whole bunch of questions. And I'll say, if you're asking a whole bunch of questions, that's when you have to get real deep, and things have gone wrong, and now you're getting real deep. But you want to think about what are the right questions to ask that's going to get the information I need to get alignment. And Susan and I and my colleagues around the Board Leadership Center spend our time when we produce um, our thought leadership. It is around how do we make a board member smarter so that she can go into the boardroom tomorrow and seem like a star. Because most board members judge other board members based on the quality, not quantity, the quality of the questions that they ask. And so we have the four rights, which I think is a nice framework: right question, right time, right people, right answer, and wait for the right answer. Right time and right people is that sometimes, and we saw this through a case study that we did, and I think the next slide shows the case study we did called "Should Maria Tone It Down?" or "When Inquiry Goes Wrong," was she asking the questions at the right time instead of in the board meeting? Was there something she could do outside the board meeting? Was there a way that she could phrase those questions? And by the way, I said questions, questions, questions. That is the modus operandi of which board members operate, as opposed to making affirmative statements and commands. It's asking questions. Um, and it's a hard thing to do, to change your brain from being from a narrative demonstrative state, which you are as an operator. And we should do this, we need to do that, which is your day job, to being a board member where you're taking a step back and, like a good grandparent, you want to ask the parent of that child, who of course is your granddaughter or grandson, um, should she be eating a bucket of candy at 8 in the morning, you know, things like that. And instead of saying, no, she can't do that, and allowing the person in between, where do you want to get? In this case, the grandparent, this is the person in between is the parent, and the grandchild is the actual target, letting the parent make that decision based on the question that you've asked. And of course, being a good parent yourself, you want to hope that the actual parent, your son or daughter, makes the right decision. And when they don't, you just shake your head and say, where did I go wrong?" Um, and that's sort of the beauty of it, the diplomacy of being a board member, which is hard, is figuring out how do I put my imprimatur on actions of the board or actions of the company without being an operator, without saying, okay, I'll just do it. Because that never should happen unless you're on a board where you're closer to the ground, a venture board, where you are hired as a board member because they wanted your expertise, because you're the only one inside of the company. Although you're on the board, you're the only one who understands the supplier. Matter of fact, you suggest as a supplier. And you have a deep vested interest that this company gets to the next step. So maybe you've been hired to really give the great advice on supply chain. And that's the only situation where you're going to get real deep, almost like a quasi operator. But for the most part, you're pretty withdrawn there. So this case study, just mention one more thing before we leave off of this, that we did. I had a lot of fun with it. I think many of you did too. We also understood what it meant to be a storyteller, and then to be a good storyteller, and that those who can do that can have a lot of success in the boardroom. Yes, let me just get to that question about activism, which is one, when as an activist in a boardroom. First of all, activism comes in different packages. The traditional stuff that we see on the front page of Wall Street Journal, activism with a big A, I like to say, sort of hedge fund activism, economic based. But you also have social and environmental activism, activism with a small a. I actually treat them equally the same in terms of threats to the company. But what that is that the activist comes with a case, a theory of change that he has to put to the market being the investors who are the voters on this. And often that theory of change uh, uh, can be a winning argument. Many times, so if you're a board member, when this happens, I always say that you need to keep some distance from the personal because it gets really personal. And I always remind folks that if the company has good bones, they're going to be around tomorrow. You might not, as a director, and there's a difference. And so when we talk about protecting the company, we're not talking about protecting the directors. Sometimes the right thing to do is that theory of change. And yeah, in the beginning, you may not want these people to be on your board, and then in the end, you may not have a choice because they get elected on by the shareholders. And then you're one board, and you got to figure out how to make things work. And typically, what we've seen in the last few years, last 7 years, remember there were 2 years in between where we didn't have a lot of activity, and that was COVID. But beyond that, what we saw was that when an activist joined the board, the rest of the board members did rally around and sort of understood what the activists were saying. And there are times, the most famous case was about 12 years ago, I recall, and I was an investor, had to deal with this, where activists did win board seats. And after a few months of listening to management, those activists, and this was an activist that actually appointed 3 board members, so it wasn't the activist himself. They appointed 3 board members who believed in the activist vision, and those 3 board members actually went with management 3 months later and said, no, we don't need to do what the activist said. By the way, since then, this is about 12 years ago, that activist, who's very well healed, actually it's the same activist going up to Disney, um, well, never puts other people on the board now. He puts himself and his colleagues. He just doesn't trust anyone else. But all that to say is that once an activist is there, they have the same fiduciary duties that you have, and they must work on behalf of the company.
And one of the questions related to that we get sometimes is, what if an activist approaches me and asks me to serve on a board as part of a slate? Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? Is that going to ruin my reputation in the board world? And to Stephen's point that there's all flavors of activists, the answer is it depends. But if it's an activist that's known for being very constructive, having good ideas, and being successful in implementing them, which there are a few, then it's that could be a great way to get onto a board. The only caveat is, as Stephen said, you don't have to dance with the one that brung you, and sometimes you may need to dance a different tune. And you have to feel that you're going to be confident and strong enough to be able to do that. So if it's your first board seat, you may want to wait until you have a little bit more experience under your belt before doing that. But it's really important to know who the activist is and what their reputation is, because there absolutely are some activists that once you get associated with them, you'll never get another board seat again unless it's with that same activist. Yeah. Yeah. Open AI board. Yeah. I'm not going to touch that one with a 10-foot pole.
Well, and I'll say this as we move on from open AI, which is interesting, because there are a lot of everyone's Monday night quarterback or Sunday night. Now that we have Monday night football, actually it's Monday night. You have to wait till all the games are over. Who will say, well, this is not, and what have you, and that the failures at OpenAI. I actually think OpenAI governance worked the way it's supposed to be. It actually is a nonprofit that holds a for-profit entity, and the nonprofit, which had a mission, was trying to abide by the mission and made it. inartfully. There's no question that, you know, uh, there's a way to let someone go, and I've seen it enough times at the senior level. That's not the way to do it, the way they did it. But that's a very interesting story there at OpenAI. But I don't call it a governance failure. I actually think it actually worked the way it's supposed to be. It's just that there's just so much involved in this, and so many different people involved. And of course, they had a major funder who disagreed with it, then tried to hide it. There's a lot of specialty stuff that happened with that, including the structure, including the involvement of Microsoft, and including that it's Silicon Valley, and all bets are off when we sort of talk about what they're trying to do. But yeah, that is a very interesting. There are many case studies. I'm writing one that will be written on that, which will be very, very interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. So in the time we have left, we just want to cover a couple of current topics that are very much on the minds of board members. And I'm going to start with technology. You all know much more about technology and what the issues are and how they're affecting business than certainly I do, than most board members do. But that's not what this is about. This is about how are boards thinking about technology. And I will tell you, and Stephen, I think you'll agree with this, that most board members are terrified about AI, and they don't know what questions to ask. They don't know where to, how to. They know that their company has to be on board with it because they don't want to be left behind. But sometimes they don't even really know the difference between AI and generative AI. They don't know what the company's strategy is, and they don't know how to ask. So they'll ask questions like, "Are you using AI?" And of course, the answer is going to be yes. And then they'll sort of let it go from there. Are you in legal compliance? And the answer will be yes. And that, it's a very, very difficult area for them. It's almost very much like the early days of cyber was like that also, where they knew it was a big deal, but they didn't know the questions because it's not within their experience. And, as Stephen said, they have egos. And often don't like to admit that they don't know what they don't know. So being able to come into a boardroom, whether you're an AI specialist or not, is going to, you will know more about what questions to ask and how to interpret the answers, probably than anyone else in the room. So be aware of that's really valuable. But it is, every time you open a magazine directed at board directors, there's always an article on the questions boards should be asking about AI. And they never go very deep. It's always, sort of a list of 5 or 6 questions. But it is a huge, huge topic in the boardroom. So if you can put AI in good faith anywhere on your board bio, I highly recommend you do it. Cybersecurity is another one. Digital transformation is also one. Question, do I think a technology member of a board must be a specialist in some area or more a generalist who understands a little bit of everything? It's a great question. I think it goes back to that, kind of serving matrix where you need to be a business generalist. You need to understand strategy. And if you have an area of expertise, then the question is, how do you bring that understanding to business conversation? So it's if you're a specialist in an area that's important to company strategy and risk, incredibly valuable. but then it's also valuable to show that you're a generalist. Stephen, do you want to talk about people as a board topic?
Very quickly, and then I want to reserve the rest of time for questions. And the people thing is just that when we look at, or when others have looked at, who've done surveys on what are the issues people care the most about, and they care about the environment, they care about guns, they care about this, they care about that. Number one is people. They care about themselves. They care about what they get paid and whether they are getting paid the right amount, whether they're getting paid a living wage. And so this concept generally of human capital management is deeply important. And so we raise it here because often it's thought of as sort of a soft issue, maybe not in the domain of boards, and it's just management, they handle HR. But if we have moved in 2024, which we have for the last 50 years, that the bulk of our valuations of a company are these intangibles in our accounting. And part of those intangibles is our workforce. It's also the technology and the IP that we have. Um, and it's not the hard assets. Then yeah, as an investor, I ask questions about those intangibles, one of which is a big part, being your people and your turnover and your recruitment. And can you get the right people? Can you get the right people coming out of college who have a different way of thinking about what they want to work on than when you were in college and coming out of college? And so the human capital management part is such a big issue. And it's also the issue, quite frankly, when we see surveys, directors and folks of director age, let's put it that way, um, just outright deny it and say, well, it's those people who are wrong. It's those these kids don't want to work and they don't do this. And I understand that because I'm in that space of understanding the fragility of, and now I teach law school students and how fragile they are. But they are the bulk of your employees. So that's the problem. You're saying this about the bulk of your employees. And so something has to change because they're not. And you have to get them to where you need to be, and you yourself need to get to where they should be. So there's sort of a new dynamic that's coming along here.
And then on the last topic, so it's climate times two, climate with two different definitions. You know, one is just climate change is an issue that boards are still wrapping their arms around. You know, both from the perspective of how does this affect the company's long-term planning? You know, if you have operations on the coast in Florida, which potentially is going to be underwater in 10 years, do you want to think about relocating? Do you want to think about, you know, kind of storms in your crisis planning? Those kinds of questions, as well as the energy transition, which, regardless of which side of the political spectrum anyone is on, I think everyone acknowledges that it is happening in one way, shape, or form, faster or slower than, you know, some or others might like. But there is change, and there's a lot of innovation and business, both opportunity and risk. And so understanding what that means from a company perspective is critically important. And so boards are spending a lot of time understanding it. They don't have to be specialists. You don't have to be a specialist in, you know, geo weather transformation, but to have enough of a fluency or literacy about it to be able to ask questions is considered important. And then, you know, sort of climate in the other sense of our climate of polarization. Board members are on the alert for the next year. You know, as Stephen said, we have over a third of the world's people are having democratic elections, and what that means for you know, the geopolitical order is one thing. What it means in terms of the polarization that we see before us today, and we know that over the next year it's just going to get worse and worse. And how, from a company perspective, do you manage that? Those are things that board members are very deeply involved in. So we have 10 minutes left, and really want to hear from you. Questions, thoughts, comments.
I have something I want to say. I don't know if everyone else will share. I expect they will. First, a huge thank you to both of you, Susan and Stephen, because I think you've given us an example throughout these 6 sessions of the linearity, the accessibility, the simplicity with which some very sophisticated concepts can and should be communicated and shared. And when we came into this, I thought we were going to be in for something that was going to be, fairly legalese and sort of involved and procedural. And what you gave us is so real life and so full of real world experience, which I think it's genuinely priceless. And I want to thank you very much, and to thank HITEC as well for making this available to all of us.
Well, thank you for that. And I want him to narrate anything. I could listen to you all day.
Isn't that true? Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It is. But I echo everything you say. Thank you. Well put, Andres. Very well put. And I agree that you have the radio podcast. Let's put it more modern voice.
And your head coming out of the black surrounding
Yes.
with your black
I
shirt.
know.
It's all
Yes.
just really got it going on there.
You have the look.
Yeah, but yeah, no, I appreciate that. We do work hard at it to try to make it real. So it's good to hear that it's well received. And we mean it when we say that this is the beginning of a conversation. There's as Patricia said up front, twice a year we're going to be there in person, and everyone who has been through one of these cohort programs is invited. So we hope you will participate. Any other questions or comments before we sign off?
Maybe
Miguel,
one question.
yeah.
Is there a
And you
big
can
difference
release the
between?
screen, Susan.
I'm sorry?
You can release the screen so
Oh,
that.
yeah, thank you.
We can see
Is there a
it.
big difference between the corporate boards you were discussing over the last 6 sessions from the US versus the European or the Asia Pac boards, the public companies, or is it there some nuances? More curious. US companies have a certain way of doing business. The Europeans may have different. I don't know. We'd love to get your
Yeah,
minute
as long as
thoughts on
we're
that.
talking, a good question, excellent question. Public companies versus private companies, but again, outside of the United States, a good portion of the companies, even if they're public, they're heavily family influenced. They have a big shareholder, and that who rules the world. And the only, I would say the difference are, so that's one. You may outside the U.S. You'll find these big families who are the shareholder, the big shareholder, and they have great influence. Is that just in general, the flavor of European companies is that they will tell you, and I guess they are a lot more advanced in thinking through the environmental and social issues, and think a lot deeper about it. One, they have rules that are a lot deeper. We don't have rules yet here in the U.S., but the public has a greater expectation. By the way, side note, a lot of that is historic for a lot of different reasons, and we were talking about the wars and what happened in post-war, but it's also because in the United States, and I'll say it until it changes. In the United States, you need to have a good job to have healthcare benefits for yourself and family. And everywhere else, that is just not the case, right? So your job is your family health is dependent on the job that you have here in the United States. And I think that drives a lot of things, whereas in Europe, they're disconnected. And in Japan and in Asia, they're starting to change a lot with having more independent board members, but a lot of it are insiders. So there are regional differences, but what's interesting is about how much they're converging. And they're converging because you have global investors, right? And so activist investors are now in Asia deeply. Now, again, they're looking for they're looking for victims, and they scoured the U.S. and they got what they got, and they're like, okay, let's get to new grounds to find and then figure out how we can do it, because those laws are different, and many of them are family owned, so it's much harder to get control, to get board members, because there's a heavy insiders. So, but that interesting question. Thank you for that.
And there's a question, is Tanya, great question. Do we see more gender parity on boards outside of the US? In Europe, absolutely. And the reason is because they have quotas,
yeah,
which we don't have here. And the legal system here is not open to quotas. So, you get 40% of boards with women in most European countries, sometimes more, whereas here it's been, sort of a 10-year slog to get up to 30%. So the answer is yes, absolutely. Well, I think we are at the end of our time. I'm not seeing any more questions. So again, thank you for all of you for coming through this journey with us. It's we do this as a labor of love. We really get a lot out of it ourselves, and so it's been a pleasure. And we look forward to seeing you at graduation.
Thank you very much.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank
you very much.
Great wrap up.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Bye. Happy New Year. Yeah.